A Bills assistant coach gets a promotion from another team, and the search is on for coordinators in Buffalo. We're breaking it down in this mini episode of Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome into this mini episode of Locked On Bills. There's just been a lot of details and news and information that's come through regarding the Bills and searching for coordinators, losing a coach to the Chicago Bears. And so I just wanted to add some commentary here as this starts to get interesting for the Bills and the future of their coaching staff. So let's talk about all that's been going on as we anticipate even more moves in the very near future. But let's start with the piece of news that has already happened and represents a change to the Buffalo Bills coaching staff, and that's Eric Washington, the Bills' assistant head coach and defensive line coach, is going to Chicago to be the Bears' defensive coordinator. And Chicago must be pretty fond of what's going on in Buffalo defensively because they just signed Tremaine Edmunds last offseason to the monster deal. Now they've claimed Eric Washington to be their defensive coordinator, and it should be interesting to see potentially what other players they pluck from the Bills defense now that there's Edmunds and Washington in Chicago. But this is going to be interesting because I feel like if there's a coach that I get asked the most questions about, that's not like the head coach or the coordinators for the Buffalo Bills, it's Eric Washington. I think there's a lot of Bills fans that don't think overly fondly of Eric Washington and perhaps believes that he's a very slow developer of talent. And we can certainly recognize this past season was the best season of defensive line play that we've seen under Sean McDermott and Eric Washington. And we saw really career seasons for Ed Oliver. We saw that happen for AJ Epinesa as well with the big time season. Greg Rousseau's had good development, but it maybe happens a little slower than a lot of people want it to. And I think there's been some frustrations for Eric Washington, but you listen to the players and you listen to the coaches, they seem to have a lot of nice things to say about Eric Washington. Well, he's no longer in the mix. He's now the Bears defensive coordinator. And he's going to be part of that staff with Matt Eberflus, who's the head coach, a defensive-minded head coach, runs a fairly similar defense structurally to what Sean McDermott has run. And whenever the news came through that Eric Washington was going to interview in Chicago, I had my suspicions that he was going to vibe really well with Matt Eberflus. They're both very regimented type people, and I felt like it was a good mix of personalities. And so he's got his defensive coordinator now in former Bills assistant head coach and defensive line coach Eric Washington. I know the big frustration with the Bills defensive line this year and really throughout the last 4 years prior to this one has been the way the defensive line has performed in those playoff elimination games. And so it's going to be interesting to see where the Bills go from here at defensive line coach. That's an important coach on a staff. Al Holcomb is certainly a coach that is already in the mix, in the building, if you will, that I could see landing that job, or the Bills could have an external hire. We'll see what happens there, but that's a hole that the Bills need to fill in their coaching staff, in addition to some other holes as well. One note here, and I've received this question from a lot of people, there is no compensatory pick awarded to you for a minority coach going to become a coordinator for another team. You only get compensatory picks for head coach and general managers that get hired away by other teams that are minorities. So no compensatory picks coming to the Bills for losing Eric Washington. it's an interesting situation for him in Chicago as well, because that's absolutely a make or break year for that coaching staff. So he's going there, and it could be a situation where he's right back in the market next offseason. So we'll see. I mean, certainly not going to sink the Bears in 2024 before the 2023 season is even over, but certainly something to keep in mind there as you're observing Washington with Chicago, and thinking about the long-term piece of that proposition for Eric Washington. All right, so the Bills have a defensive coordinator vacancy, right? And we talked about this last week following Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane's year-end press conferences, and that they really didn't give any indications about what the plan was at defensive coordinator, whether it was going to be an internal promotion, an external hire, or if Sean McDermott was going to continue in that role. Well, we finally got a clue into what the plan is, because it came through over the weekend that the Bills were going to interview Sean Desai for the defensive coordinator role. And that's a big move, because it tells us that they are at least considering Sean McDermott not being the defensive coordinator, which opens up a whole world of conversation. And so the first known candidate for the defensive coordinator search is Sean Desai, who's a young coach. He does have 2 seasons of coordinator experience, 2021 with the Chicago Bears, and then last season with the Philadelphia Eagles. Neither defense was particularly good. Actually, I would say both defenses were below average. But Sean Desai was an assistant of Vic Fangio for a while, and I think a lot of people thought that there was some similarities there in how Fangio was grooming Desai, and he's gotten 2 opportunities now to be a defensive coordinator. Hasn't really worked out. This wouldn't be a hire that really moves the needle for me. I wouldn't be hopeful that this is the coach that the Bills hire, just based on the results of the last 2 defenses, especially last year in Philadelphia, where they literally secretly fired him in the middle of the season and allowed Matt Patricia to become their defensive coordinator. So I'm not in love with the resume, but one thing I will say about Sean Desai is that despite 2 opportunities to be a defensive coordinator already, and it hasn't gone well, multiple teams have already put in interview requests for him. The Bills have, and the Atlanta Falcons have. And what's interesting about the Bills and the Falcons is that those are both teams with defensive-minded head coaches. Obviously, Sean McDermott, and Atlanta just hired Raheem Morris to be their head coach. He's defensive-minded. And so 2 defensive-minded head coaches are interested, at least, in speaking with Sean Desai for their vacancies at defensive coordinator. So I think the most interesting part of this whole piece of this whole news about Sean Desai interviewing in Buffalo is that the Bills are considering hiring a defensive coordinator, and that search is on. And so, again, I'm not hopeful that it's Sean Desai, but the big piece of information is that the Bills are considering alternatives to Sean McDermott being the defensive coordinator. All right, I want to tell you about Bobby Babbich, who's my pick for defensive coordinator. The challenges there. The offensive coordinator search is also on in Buffalo, so we got more to get to here, so be sure to stick with me. But, folks, you got to check out PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the most fun, most exciting, easiest way to play daily fantasy sports. The format is incredible. It's just you against numbers. It's not you against thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. It's just you against numbers. Here's what you do. You select 2 or more players. You pick more or less than their projected stats, and you place your entry. That's it. Doesn't take long. Picks can be made in under a minute, and then when you win, withdrawals are super, super quick. So check it out. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than what's going on with our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off our chest every once in a while. Therapy is helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for those who've experienced major trauma. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Just visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. All right, folks. So my preferred choice for the Buffalo Bills defensive coordinator vacancy would be Bobby Babbich. And Bobby Babbich has been part of the Bills staff since 2017. And everything he's done has turned, or everything he's touched has turned to gold. So he becomes the safeties coach in 2018. Obviously, that goes hand in hand with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer becoming superstar safeties in the NFL. Then in 2022, he becomes the Bills linebackers coach, where you saw Tremaine Edmonds very clearly have his best season. Of course, Matt Milano, unbelievable. And then this past year with what he did with Terrell Bernard and Tyrell Dotson. So this feels like a young star coach in the making. You listen to him speak in press conferences, you could just tell he's got an it factor. There's a charismatic way about him. There's a way that he just commands the room, right? You can just tell there's something about this guy. And so I would love for him to be the Bills defensive coordinator. It certainly feels like he's been groomed for this opportunity. Well, there's a lot of teams that are interested in Bobby Babbich to be their defensive coordinator. So far, he's got interview requests from the New York Giants, the Miami Dolphins, and the Green Bay Packers. And it's kind of a challenging situation. To me, it just seems so obvious, right? Like Sean McDermott, hire Bobby Babbich to be your defensive coordinator. He's a young superstar. Let's roll with it. Well, you also have to look at this through the lens of Bobby Babbich, right? Where Bobby Babbich is in demand. Multiple teams are talking to him. And while he could probably take that job in Buffalo and do a great job, the question is always going to be there about, is it Sean McDermott's defense or is it Bobby Babbich's defense, and who gets credit? Or if offered the opportunity, he's got 3 offensive-minded head coaches in Brian Daboll with the Giants, who obviously saw Bobby Babbich for a number of years in Buffalo, Mike McDaniel with the Miami Dolphins, or Matt LaFleur with the Green Bay Packers, right? All offensive-minded head coaches. If he goes there, there is no question about who gets credit for the defense. And I think Bobby Babbich has that type of future where he's probably, the type of guy that seems like he could be a head coach one day. So what positions himself better to get there? Is it being Sean McDermott's defensive coordinator in Buffalo, or branching out and really doing it your own way without that extra layer of, okay, Sean McDermott's there. Is it Babbich or is it McDermott? There'll be no question if he goes somewhere else. So it's an interesting situation. Obviously, I mean, he knows Buffalo. He knows that personnel. It feels like it'd be a great place for him, but what positions him better to be a head coach? And I think that's something we have to be mindful of. So it might not be a situation where the Bills don't retain Bobby Babbich because they don't want to, but Bobby Babbich looks at the scenario and says, yeah, my best shot is probably going somewhere else. So that's just an important layer. As even I've found myself kind of getting nervous. It's like, Sean, just promote him to be your DC, because if you don't, some other team's going to. Well, Bobby Babbich has got a say in this as well. And so I think there's just some things to be mindful of. And, 3 opportunities already where teams are talking to him. All right, so that's the defensive coordinator side of things. Only thing we know is that the Bills are interviewing Sean Desai. That's literally it at this point. At offensive coordinator, where there is the vacancy, of course, the interim OC is Joe Brady. And Joe Brady has interviewed for the job. He was the first one to interview for the job. Obviously, Josh Allen has endorsed him. You saw what he did last season. Good resume prior with, I thought he did a good job in his first season in Carolina. LSU, obviously a historic offense. So he's obviously in the mix. And we heard Beane and McDermott talk about how good of a job he did. Brandon Beane said he's a very serious candidate, all that type of stuff. But the Bills have also put an interview request in for Thad Lewis. And Thad Lewis, former Bills quarterback, who's very quickly become well thought of in coaching circles. He was the Buccaneers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterbacks coach this past season. Obviously, Baker Mayfield had an amazing season. The last few years, he was the assistant wide receivers coach in Tampa Bay. And so it's certainly interesting. I think Thad Lewis has a bright future. And I, like I said, he's very well thought of. There's some connections that I have that have spoken glowingly about Thad Lewis and his future, but he's got 1 year, literally just 1 year as experience as a position coach in the NFL. I don't know if that screams hand the keys of the offense over to that guy when Josh Allen's your quarterback. And, moreover, I think there's probably going to be a great opportunity for him to stay in Tampa Bay and be their offensive coordinator because their offensive coordinator, Dave Canales, is now the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. So I think that Thad Lewis is going to be a coordinator, and it might be this year in Tampa Bay. I don't know. There's nothing you can point to. He's never been an offensive coordinator. He's only had one season of work as a position coach, as a full-time position coach. So who knows? I think he's got a bright future just based on what I've been told. But is this the right coordinator to hand the keys over to? I'd have some questions about that. But obviously, if he came in and was able to be hired by the Bills, that would say a whole lot about what they think he could be, for the limited resume, ignoring Josh Allen's recommendation and feeling like, yeah, this is the guy, right? That would say a lot about just how the Bills view him. So be interesting to see what happens with Thad Lewis this cycle. I think his time as a coordinator is coming, and he's at least earned himself an interview opportunity with the Buffalo Bills. And I'd like to think that's a very, very high profile offensive coordinator opportunity. So right now we know the candidates for offensive coordinator are Joe Brady and Thad Lewis. I've given my personal list, but a couple guys I would like to see the Bills speak to: Kellen Moore from the Los Angeles Chargers, the Dallas Cowboys before that, and T. Martin, who's the quarterback's coach for the Baltimore Ravens. Last thing I want to mention here is Ken Dorsey. He's getting some opportunities. He's interviewing for the offensive coordinator positions available for the Cleveland Browns and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And so, one thing I've maintained about Ken Dorsey is that I think he's going to be a good offensive coordinator. I think he deserves another opportunity to be an offensive coordinator. I just don't think he was the right offensive coordinator for Josh Allen. Josh Allen plays the game a little bit differently, and Ken Dorsey's offense was very much predicated on, okay, what's the coverage and what routes do we have to beat the coverage? Everyone on the same page, execute, right? It kind of puts a lot on everyone to play within structure, and it's not really Josh Allen, right? He's a guy that likes to attack in a lot of different ways, and I don't think that was a good fit for each other. So, but I think these are, him going to another place makes a lot of sense to me. I think he deserves an opportunity to be an offensive coordinator, but I would want him with the right quarterback. I would want a very process-oriented quarterback that's going to be maybe robotic might be a little bit of a stretch, but very much okay, this is where the safeties are. This is the coverage. This is where I would go with the football. Robotic, right? Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for, robotic. So not Josh Allen. So I thought I'd give that update, as well as I'm always kind of curious to see what happens with people that the Bills move on from and, what comes of their careers. And so Ken Dorsey looking to at least have a few opportunities to be an offensive coordinator next season. All right, so that's it for now. There could certainly be a lot of updates. This news can come fast and quick and all that type of stuff. But as there's been a lot that's come through, I wanted to take just a little bit of time here and get everyone updated and share some thoughts about what's going on with the Bills coaching staff and what those searches look like. So hope you enjoyed this. We're going to get started on Monday with our performance review series, really evaluating and critiquing the Buffalo Bills operation in 2023 so we can determine exactly what they need for 2024. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great day. Go Bills, and we'll catch up with you again real soon.